Thomas Frank has strongly laid down his thoughts on why his Spurs team are struggling to keep the ball and make chances in open play during his pre-match press conference before our first trip to the Hill Dickinson Stadium to play Everton tomorrow. I'll bring you all the quotes and my thoughts on what Thomas Frank had to say, as well as my preview to that huge game on Sunday in today's episode. Guys, thanks so much for watching and listening wherever you are. If you're on YouTube, do give this video a like. Please do subscribe to the channel for daily Tottenham Hotspur news. But let's get started. Thomas Frank started with the team news. He says Dominic Solanke remains out, but he is now doing solo training on the grass and progressing. That's huge news for Spurs. To say we miss Dominic Solanke, for me, might be the key part of our kind of up and down start to this season. Let's not forget we finished 17th, so the fact we're in 6th place going to the Hill Dickinson Stadium isn't too bad. But I do think with Dominic Solanke holding the ball up, we would have got a lot more points on the board. So him getting closer to return is huge for us. Christian Romero also back out on the grass today. That's probably a little bit earlier than expected and probably gives him a little bit of a chance to face Newcastle in the Carabao Cup in the week, although I wonder whether Romero won't want to be risked for that game compared to the Chelsea at home game, which comes after that. But of course, we do have previous in bringing players back from injury for the Chelsea at home game, and then it all going to shit with loads of players getting injured. Do you remember a couple of years ago under Ange Postecoglou? So he gave a very in-depth press conference before this game, Thomas Frank, and he has been starting to get a few pelters, Thomas Frank. It's just the way it goes as a Spurs manager, isn't it? I mean, frankly, I would say that clubs like Nottingham Forest, for instance, usually probably wouldn't get as much pressure on their managers as Spurs. But as you saw with Ange Postecoglou, they're getting sacked after basically just over 6 weeks. When you're a Premier League manager at any club, but particularly a club who have aspirations to be in the Champions League regularly, like Tottenham undoubtedly do, and of course to win trophies, now we've won the Europa League, the pressure comes on. And the reality for Frank is, at the moment, it goes back to that kind of old Jose Mourinho, Antonio Conte thing where the press would always say, listen, it's all well and good playing that style of football when you're winning, but when the results start to go awry, questions will be asked. And to say that Frank is under some questioning at the moment would be a bit of an understatement. So Thomas Frank, when asked about some tough games coming up and whether he'll have a real idea of the level of the squad after, he said this: I'm learning every day about the team and the players, the individuals. I see a very willing group, willing to work hard, to perform, to do their best for the team and this wonderful club. I learned after a very competitive performance against Aston Villa, I think, okay, there's something here. Very interesting. I know we lost, but the performance, that's what I need to look at all the time. I also learned on Wednesday night against Monaco, 2 examples. It's every day and you can say it in a way. I can't remember the number of weeks we were down the line, but then we were more. But my focus right now is on Everton. That last bit, to be honest, doesn't make sense reading off the page, but some people, especially Tottenham fans on social media, have been saying that now Thomas Frank is starting to be a little disingenuous in his press conferences by talking about, you know, a very competitive performance against Aston Villa and saying there was something interesting in that Monaco performance. I mean, maybe what he's alluding to there is that he's found out as many negatives as he has positives, and that's going to help him pick his teams going forward. But for me, the biggest issue that he's got is the injuries. We miss Christian Romero's passing, we miss the balance from Destiny Udogie, and massively miss the hold-up play from Dominic Solanke. I said it in my post-match review. I'll say it again from the Monaco game. Kolo Muani showed me more in 20 minutes of hold-up play than Richarlison has done for a long time. The ball bounced off Richarlison every single time it came to him against Monaco, and I was getting more and more frustrated. So I do wonder whether maybe Kolo Muani will get a start against Everton tomorrow in the 9. I'm recording this on Saturday morning. And if he does, I said it before, I'll say it again, I wouldn't mind if Richarlison played off the left, but Thomas Frank hasn't really given him that chance yet. But he does play, I think, his best stuff for Spurs off the left. Frank was also asked about Tottenham's lack of creativity this season. He says, I want to play with high intensity and big aggressiveness. And in the Premier League, you need physicality. So you need to have a certain level of physicality in the team. If you don't have that, you have no chance. If you look at the 3 big boys right now, look at Liverpool, Arsenal and City, all of them have unbelievable physicality. Then you need some players that can make the difference, and you need to set up the structure that makes sure we play free-flowing football as much as possible. To be honest, I completely agree with Thomas Frank here. I've been saying it for a while. Nobody gets anywhere in the Premier League now unless they're a big group of blokes. It's true. And if you can kind of match that physicality with pace in the forward areas as well, then you have a real chance in a lot of games, especially if you're trying to hit teams on the transition. And I have to say, at the moment, I think Thomas Frank, where he's finding a little bit of issues is, yes, Xavi Simons is our most creative player at the moment because of Kulusevski and Maddison's injuries, but he's too lightweight. He goes down too easily, and players are just kind of brushing him off the ball in the Premier League. Now, I'm confident with Xavi Simons as opposed to, say, somewhere we've suffered before with like a Brian Hill. I think Xavi Simons will get stronger and will get used to it more. It's just kind of a bit of a new experience for him, similar to Florian Wirtz at Liverpool, whereas Brian Hill was just always going to be far too small for it. But it's going to take Xavi Simons time to learn that not only do you have to make the space, but you have to ride some of the challenges. You have to use your, like Kudus does. He uses his butt, basically, and his low center of gravity sometimes to just shake opposition players off. But Simons isn't doing that yet. So I can see what Thomas Frank is saying in terms of needing physicality throughout that middle. And that's another reason why he'll continue, I think, to play Palhinha and Bentancur together, because they do offer that physicality in central midfield. And it's not all just about, I know a lot of people talking about, progressive passing. It's not all about that. Think about how many, in the modern game, how many headers the midfielders have to win. It's kind of head tennis quite a lot as the game gets more physical and more direct during this weird kind of period of time we're in, where tiki-taka is going out the window in the Premier League, and it's becoming more set pieces, long throws, physicality, goalkeepers kicking it long. Mickey van der Ven kicking our goal kicks long, just whacking it up the pitch. I mean, I have to say, not to bring him back into the equation, but Ange Postecoglou somewhere watching Spurs at the moment, turning in his non-existent grave because he had no interest in long balls like this. And it's taking a while for Spurs to get used to it. The key for me is those three midfielders, whoever they are, they have to be absolutely fighting tooth and nail for the second ball, because we're not winning any first balls in the air from balls down the channels or long balls up to the number 9, because Richarlison can't hold it up. And if Tell's playing there, he can't hold it up either. So it's about the second balls after the defender has won the first ball, won the first header, and getting that second ball in central midfield. And that's where I feel like we've not been as strong in the last few weeks as we were, say, in the West Ham game away, or even all the way back to the City game away, or the Paris Saint-Germain Super Cup game. So that's where we've got to kind of up it. And maybe some of you will say, well, Pat Matasar was playing in a lot of those games. And that's true. Where Pat Matasar really is good is in having the engine and the legs to kind of get up and down to be able to scrap for those second balls. But then it's like you can't have everything, because when Sarr plays, you can't technically keep the ball in midfield. And you may argue we've not been doing that recently anyway, and that's a fair argument. So be interesting to see if Sarr plays tomorrow. I'm doing my predicted team at the end of this episode, and I haven't put Sarr in it. But Thomas Frank did give some quotes on Pape Matasar, that I'll come to later in this episode. Thomas Frank did insist there's more to come from this Tottenham side. He said that is football, and that is down to a swing of a leg sometimes, a margin, a ball is dropping to you on the other side, injuries. There are so many things, but step by step, we will get stronger. I'm just going to break into this quote there, because I actually super agree with Thomas Frank there. In every game we played, and that Aston Villa game is a really good example. If that Kudus second goal had been onside, if he just held his run a little bit, or just, like you're saying, a swing of a leg here. If Matty Cash doesn't do the most impressive thing that he's done in his entire career with that volleyed sidewinder pass across the pitch, then Spurs would have got a draw or a win. And I agree with him that it is step by step, and you've got to ride out these injuries, and you've got to ride out these difficulties. And we are picking up more points, whereas previously we would have lost games. So I think Thomas Frank is right here, and I think let's just try and stay in it for me at the moment. It's difficult at the moment, especially missing Romero and Udogie. It's difficult, and Solanke. So let's try and ride it. Let's try and get points where we can. We got that good result against Leeds 2 games ago. We got a decent draw against Monaco, even though we played absolutely appallingly. And then if we can get those players back and still be in there or thereabouts in the Premier League, and try and somehow get a result in the Carabao Cup against Newcastle away, which would be very difficult against the holders in the week. But imagine if we could stay in that, like nick it somehow on penalties or something. Make it into a really scrappy, unrhythmical game, then stay in the Carabao Cup, and then start building some momentum. And then maybe as we get into kind of the beginning of next year, if we're still in everything and have the players back, there'll be a real belief within this squad that something can happen again like it did last year. He went on to say that I'm not in doubt of in terms of the club, the team getting stronger. He said, I'm relatively happy with where we are. I would say relatively happy. I always want more, but I just know there is more to come. So I kind of agree with him with that, but we've got to stay together and patient as a fan base as well. I can sense the frustration coming in the fan base. And a lot of players, a lot of fans feeling apathetic because of the style and stuff like that. But I just want us all to remember, it is a big swing from 17th in the league to trying to fight for the Champions League. And we're going to have to roll with the punches. And I know it's difficult. And yes, on the watch along that I'll be doing tomorrow on BigUp, and do join me that, details of how in the description box below. I will be frustrated if, for instance, Everton outplay us in the same way that they did last season at Goodison Park. But hopefully they won't. We'll make it a scrap and we'll get some chances on the transition and hopefully turn them over. Thomas Frank was asked in the press conference on his viewpoint about Bentancur and Palhinha starting together being a bit predictable in possession. He said, I think probably the team. It's always team effort, how we construct the team, or how, in the end, of course, it's my decision. It's a collective effort in terms of how we want to build up or how we want to create chances. I think both of them are more than capable of helping the team. And one thing is that part of the game. The other part is, of course, how we can make sure we're strong and solid enough if we're in a spell where we may be not as free-flowing as we want it to be because of new players gelling or getting smooth and more free together. How can we make sure that if it doesn't work, how can we make sure we're super solid and still building? So it's all part of the puzzle. So I'd say he's kind of sitting on the fence there, kind of protecting his players. What he's saying is he thinks they can be more, progressive in their passing going forward. He thinks they're both capable of that. I think there's some truth to that. But also he keeps really, really saying about solidity. And as a team who lost, 23 games last season, you can see why he would say that. And as I've said before, and I'll say again, my experience this season of every time that we have started chasing a game and taken off one of Palhinha or Bentancur when they've been playing together, we have lost all shape in central midfield. And we've kind of reverted back to what was the problem under Ange Postecoglou, which is kind of just one pass or one run through the centre of midfield leaves us absolutely gaping. Now, that's not to say that we didn't give up chances against Monaco during the week either. And I thought Monaco played really well. And you've got to remember, Monaco had loads of injuries. Basically, that performance against Monaco was very similar to the performance at Bodo Glimt, I think. We were kind of absolutely passed off the pitch. And for me, maybe there's an argument to say for the games like that, we could try and bring another man into central midfield because Monaco had two number 10s, Fati and Akliouche, both good players, but they both dropped off the striker, whereas we had two wide men. So they had many more players in central midfield, and maybe that's something where Thomas Frank needs to rotate and rotate tactically and stylistically to try and match that in the middle so we're not just getting passed around. Because in a situation like that, even Palhinha and Bentancur, as solid they are and as good as they are at winning the ball back in central midfield, they can't fight against four central midfielders. That was basically impossible for them. Okay, so obviously, as mentioned, difficult game at Everton tomorrow. He was asked about facing Everton and Jack Grealish tomorrow afternoon. He said, first and foremost, I think Everton are a very competitive team with many good players, more than just Grealish. I think Beto has been good up front and Dye has been very good, and Dewsbury Hall. A good colleague and friend of mine, David Moyes, is in charge, and his teams are always very, very competitive. He's a manager and a person I respect massively in the game. And then, of course, Jack Grealish, I think it's also down to the player, but also the coaching staff, the manager, and Moyes have got Grealish to flourish again. He's a main creator, no doubt about that. He's so dangerous. He can create something out of nothing in every game. So, of course, we need to be wary. Listen, I'm going to hold my hands up. I was saying all summer, I'm wary of buying players who have had their big move, who've been on massive wages. Are they going to come to a club like Spurs and be motivated? And got to say, in hindsight, Jack Grealish would have been absolutely perfect for what Spurs need right now on the left-hand side. He would have dominated that left-hand side. He would have offered something different to Kudus on the right-hand side, and we would have had, a really strong full forward line. So I now kind of regret saying that Spurs shouldn't go in for Grealish. He's done brilliantly at Everton. But there's another question, another argument, play devil's advocate. Would he have been the main man at Spurs? Maybe not. And actually at Everton, he's the main man. Everything goes through him and Ndiaye, and they are really creative. So that's going to be very dangerous for us tomorrow. The thing I just hold hopes of is it cannot surely be as bad as it was at Goodison Park last season. That was the absolute worst of Ange Postecoglou's tenure as far as I'm concerned. So I'm hopeful that we'll be a lot tighter and a lot harder to break down tomorrow. Frank was also asked about not having Kulusevski, Maddison or Solanke available. And as well as that, Sonny having left and it being difficult to get into an attacking rhythm with all of those players not there anymore. He said every head coach and manager wants all the players fit. And we get that when we complain about the score being too big. That leads to disappointed players, but in a way, I'd rather have that. It is what it is. You're right. I very rarely have said anything about injuries because it is what it is. I need to deal with it. And it's my job to put the best possible available team on the pitch and hopefully get it clicking. Of course, some of these, especially Kulusevski and Maddison, are proven players that have proven this club for goals and assists and creating things. So they would have been lovely to be able to use. But I think we have some very talented players who are growing. Wilson, meaning Odobert, Xavi Simons, Tell has been very good for us as well. Mohamed Kudus has been very good for us as well. And I think Richarlison had a good start to the season trying to get up to pace. The reality is that we are working very hard on getting the flow with the front four, and hopefully it will be better bit by bit. Again, he's talking about adding layers, trying to improve bit by bit, game by game. So we're going to have to be patient. He says, I think it's fair to say, I can't remember the amount of games we played, but there have definitely been some good games and good spells where I've been looking very good. So we'll keep working. He also said, I'm looking into every aspect to do everything I can to maximize the performance. What is the best way to get results and make sure we play as well as possible? And then he said, and this annoyed some people on social media, to be honest, he said, I think there's been one bad game, Bournemouth, and then bad second halves against Wolves and Monaco. I think the rest have been good or good plus. I don't remember any of the Wolves game being good, I have to say. Oh no, maybe the first 20, 25 minutes. The one thing I'll keep banging on about, because it'd be interesting to see if it happens tomorrow, is we just seem to fall away after about 60 minutes. Whether we've been good in the first 60 minutes or not, we tend to get worse and drop deeper and lose any kind of control of the game. And that is something to worry about as far as I'm concerned. But like I said earlier on, I think we have to give Thomas Frank time. I see not necessarily stylistically on the pitch yet, but I see common familiarities between Frank and Pochettino in terms of his messaging, in terms of his calmness, in terms of his ability to deal with the press. In fact, I'd say Frank is arguably a better communicator than Pochettino. And I think I don't have any evidence so far to see that the players don't trust him. So I think we're going to have to be patient and listen. It would be absolutely amazing if somehow we can get a win tomorrow. That would be incredible. And then go into that Newcastle game in the week with a little bit of momentum. But let's see what happens. Frank was asked so far, Thomas Frank was asked about midfielders' involvement in the team's build-up. He said it's a collective effort in terms of build-up and creating chances. They're more than capable of helping the team. Again, he's talking about Palhinha again and Bentancur there. Then he was asked about long throws and it being a weapon in today's game. Talk about a subject close to the man's heart. He said, I think this season I've seen a crazy peak in it. Personally, I like it. I think it's whatever you can do to create an advantage in your team or create an extra weapon, extra threat. I think you need to look into it. I know there can be styles and what you believe in and all that. I'm just thinking, how can I make sure that we hopefully maximize the opportunities to score a goal? To score a goal is the most difficult thing to do in football. Can you give yourself one more weapon? Why not? I don't mind us doing long throws at all, right? Kevin Danso's got an amazing long throw, but I have an issue with it. We don't have any movement from those long throws. So every time, and correct me if I'm wrong in the comments, we have a conversation about it, but every time the long throw comes in, the defender at the front post, who is able to see it because he's, running towards it, always heads the first one out. What we need to have from that long throw, as far as I'm concerned, players, like we do from corners, running across from the back post to the front post to get momentum in their run to then leap higher and flick it on. Or players starting on the touchline and using that angle to run towards the front post to flick it on, and players running across the goalkeeper. As far as I'm concerned, Andreas Georgeson, our set piece coach, should be coaching the players to make runs from deep. That will unsettle the defenders. They won't know whether to come and try and mark deep to start where the run is and try and block them off, which they can't block as easily this season because penalties are going to be given away, which is exactly the reason why long throws are now de rigueur in the Premier League, because defenders are no longer allowed to grapple the way they were before because they're so afraid of penalties. So now it's just like get it in the box and defenders will struggle. But as attackers from these long throws, you have to make movement to allow yourself to have the momentum to win the header in the air and flick it on. I can only think of one this season, which maybe two. And I think one of them was against Monaco, where it came so deep and came over the defenders and over the keeper almost. We've got to get more movement in there. That's what I'd say about those long throws. Let me know what you think, though. Frank was asked about Saar, Bergvall and Gray having started the first home game in midfield against Burnley, a game we won. And is there any specific reason we haven't seen those three together since? He said this, probably because I thought the other bits were more of the right players to pick for the day, as in the best players to pick for each game. Of course, I'm looking into every aspect to try to do everything I can to maximize the performance. First and foremost, maximize performance and what I think is the best way we can to try and get results, but also make sure we play as well as possible. In general, I've overall been happy with both João, Palhinha, and Rodrigo Bentancur in what I'm looking at. People can look at different things. As I said, there's also how we construct the front four. That's a big part of how you can say creatively we've been, and they are finding their feet, and I think there's positives from a lot of them. So again, I'd say kind of Thomas Frank kind of sitting on the fence a little bit there. He was also asked about Christian Romero and how important he is to Tottenham. He said, I think QT is a top central defender in every aspect. As a leader, as a defender, and as a playmaker is maybe a big word, but as a player that helps the team building from the back. Like I said, we're just going to have to get through these games where Romero isn't fit. Unfortunately, with Christian Romero, his entire career at Spurs, he has been unfit too many times. It is as simple as that. But hopefully this is just a small one, and maybe he can be back for Newcastle, if not Chelsea. But we miss his passing and his leadership, of course, and his defending, but more than anything, his passing. Frank was also asked about Pat Matasar, like I said earlier, and why he's not really had much game time recently. He said there's nothing wrong with him. He was a very good player for us in the first 6 games. We rested him as a precaution before, but competition for places and other players have done well. He has impressed me a lot, though. Lots of people calling for Pat Matasar to come back. It's a difficult one, like I said earlier, because just technically, in terms of his taking the ball on the half turn, for instance, he's not very good at it yet. He's still a young boy. He could improve, but he's just a rangy engine room. It really will be interesting to see what midfield Thomas Frank picks tomorrow for away at Everton. Let me know what you think he'll do in the comments below. Frank was asked how close Randall Kolo Muani is on starting matches. He said he's definitely getting closer. I think now it's the first time he had an okay sustained block of training and some minutes. I think it's also fair to say that he's not 100% there physically to be bombarding him with 90 minutes, go again and again and again, but he's in a place where he can be used, and that's good news. That doesn't sound to me necessarily like Kolo Muani is going to be starting tomorrow at Everton in the 9. I would quite like to see that. I'd like to see us be able to hold it up. Obviously, Everton, as ever, will always have big centre-backs who like coming through the number 9. I do think Richarlison should play, but ideally for me out wide left, because I think he'll want to do well at the Hill Dickinson Stadium. He scored a brilliant goal at Goodison for Spurs last season, remember, in the top corner. Absolutely brilliant. So he'll be pumped to play in that game, but it doesn't sound to me like he's going to. And then Thomas Frank was also asked whether he's noticed any effects on the team and the squad after Daniel Levy left and after the wider structural changes at the club. He said, I think the day we decided that Daniel was not there anymore, it was a bit unusual. That's probably the right word to use. There were first couple of weeks, a lot of questions from you guys. I needed to answer them, and then a bit in the media. But since then, you've got on with things. I focus on trying to prepare the team in the best way possible with my coaching staff. The players are in their own little bubble and try to do the best they can to perform and make sure we're in the best possible place. So for me now, it's a little bit like business as usual. And of course, behind the scenes, we're getting to know each other better and the direction we are going in. Just to say, my latest on the kind of boardroom upheaval and the changes behind the scenes at Tottenham is that ENIC are doubling down on not wanting to sell the club. And let's not forget that it wasn't just a Levy out protest down the years. It was an ENIC out protest. And yes, I think ENIC are now kind of saying, oh, it's a new era and it's the Lewis family. It's not Joe Lewis and it's, you know, Viv Lewis and Charlie and the other guys. But for me, unless we go really big in the January transfer window and start looking to buy players that can really improve our first team and pay more wages, then I think we can all be fair. It'll all be fair to say that it'll just be much of a muchness and nothing really will change. And I think that will be problematic for the Lewis family because the Spurs fans have now had a little taste of potentially what a new owner could bring with that kind of, whether it was true or not, but with that American DJ's bid where he said he's going to spend 1.2 billion on the team. There's been a little taste for the Spurs fans. And so the Lewis family, I think, are going to have to pull something big out. Now, I mentioned earlier in this episode about, you know, Thomas Frank reminding me a little bit about like Mauricio Pochettino when he first arrived at the club. And actually, he was asked in the press conference about how why he thinks his record so far has been very similar to Pochettino's start at Tottenham. He says, not only that example, but I think it's a good example because, of course, Pochettino is a legend here. What he built, what he was part of achieving, I think it's definitely a spell I looked at when I was not here. And of course, I was aware of when I got offered the job. I looked at that period and thought, wow, what he built, what they built together was quite unique and quite impressive. I think any success in football history is more or less from clubs and teams that had the same head coach or manager for a long spell. That is not about me, but also includes the key staff members. That can be sports directors, CEO, assistant coaches, and of course the manager or head coach. It's almost a non-negotiable. And then, of course, it's up to me to make sure we have enough progress along the way. But we all know it'll be a little bit up and down. I agree with him, but he's going to have to do what Pochettino did in that first season and eventually show some growth. And that growth under Pochettino came because Harry Kane scored that free kick against Aston Villa that was deflected off the wall. And then we really started pushing together from then. Pochettino had already by that point started making a decision to kind of sack off the elder players and believe in the younger players. It'll be interesting to see whether that ever happens, for instance, with Bentancur and Palhinha down the line. Will he actually say, okay, it's actually better for me to play, Sarr, Gray and Bergvall together when he feels they've grown enough? But he definitely doesn't feel that right now. But I think if we're patient enough with Thomas Frank, then maybe he could have a bit of a legacy like Pochettino. I really like his messaging anyway. Frank was also asked about Brennan Johnson. He said, I think one of Brennan's big strengths is the ability to arrive in the right areas. That's a key strength. And the ability to score goals is good. I agree. I think he was positive when he came on against Monaco. I mean, I'd say he got himself in a position to have that chance that he didn't really get hold of. He went on to say, I think he had the biggest chance we had. There we go. He arrived in some good areas. He worked hard in the recovery runs, which he needs to do. So yes, that is his key strength. Recovery runs is massive with Brennan Johnson. Sometimes I find I watch him when he's having to work backwards. He doesn't like it. He doesn't like it at all. And he has to. I'm afraid he's not good enough on the ball to not be an absolute back and forth player. He's not Mo Salah on the ball. If he was, then you can allow him to cheat every so often. But Brennan Johnson needs to work harder back and forth. There's been some talk on some of the other Spurs podcasts I've been listening to this week about maybe Brennan Johnson getting his chance against Everton. It wouldn't work for me personally. I could be wrong, but certainly not as a wide right to drop Mohamed Kudus, because Everton will not play high up and leave room in behind. I just don't think that's Moyes' way. But let's see what happens. Again, let me know your team in the description, in the comments box below. And then Pedro Porro has given a quote after the Monaco Champions League game. He said, we're not in a bad situation, but let's hope the second win comes. The other day in the draw against Monaco, I said in the dressing room after, we don't have the right mentality. And in this competition, they run you over and you don't even realize it. I agree. I just don't think Spurs are good enough at keeping the ball and trying well enough to keep the ball. It's got to change. Okay, just before I do my Everton predicted team and the score, again, please do come and join me for the watch along on Big Up tomorrow. There were some tech problems with it against Monaco in the week, but that should be all sorted. So come and join me on Big Up. Details how in the description box below. Got a great community there, so do join me. And also there's a fantasy game that we can play with it where you can win big bucks. So come and join me there. So my team for tomorrow, this is my predicted team. Vicario, Porro, Spence, Van der Ven and Dancer. I think it's no-brainer. I don't really think we've got many options. I'm actually making a TikTok video today about Luka Vuskovic and how now, with the injury to Romero and Ben Davis, it looks absolutely mad that we let him go to Hamburg, where, by the way, he is ripping it up, Luka Vuskovic. He is ripping it up at Hamburg. They love him there. They're not winning every game by any means, but he's an 18-year-old who's been like kind of nominated as the leader of their defense, and he's scoring the odd goal as well. And we could have done with him at Spurs, but we'll get him back next season. Anyway, midfield, I've gone with Bentancur, Palhinha and Gray. A functional, leggy midfield with Bentancur and Palhinha holding and then Gray just bombing forward, making runs. And I think he's earned it. So that's why I've gone there. And then in the forward line, I've gone Kudus on the right, Johnson on the left, I think he might play, and then Richarlison up front. But let me know your predicted team. I'm not sure. And then in terms of a prediction, I said in my prediction for the Monaco game, I didn't have a good feeling about it. I was right to not have a good feeling about it. We played awfully and we got a decent draw. I don't have a good feeling about the Hill Dickinson Stadium either. I think this will be probably one of Everton's big games there. They'll enjoy it. And I think Moyes will do anything he can to turn us over. I desperately hope I'm wrong, but I'm going for a 2-1 Everton win, I'm afraid. Anyway, guys, thanks so much for watching and listening. Really appreciate it. Once again, do give this video a like. Do subscribe to the channel if you're not a subscriber for daily Tottenham Hotspur news and views. And yeah, like I said, come and join me on Big Up tomorrow for the watch along. 4:25 it'll start. Details of how to join Big Up in the description box below. Come on, you Spurs. Enjoy your Saturdays. Cheers.